This is Dr. Gary Kellner, and I would like to welcome you to Fair Game. It has often struck me how religious movements with an absolute view of truth often demonstrate that visibly by wearing black and white. The most obvious illustration of this would be the ultra-Orthodox Jews. But you see the same thing in the Roman Catholic tradition. Roman Catholic priests often dressed in black robes, or in the 20th century, black suits with a white collar. Nuns dressed in black with white accents. Protestants, who sometimes chiefly define themselves by the fact that they aren't Catholic, have their own versions of this. The Amish community, men wear black suits and white shirts. Sometimes they wear blue shirts. Women dress in black, sometimes with blue accents. Now, younger generation of Amish began to paint the famous buggies with blue bumpers. Now, anyone who's been to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, knows that the black buggies are everywhere. But these younger, more liberal Amish began to paint the buggies blue. And they became known as the Blue Buggy Bumper Amish. Well, this created a tremendous dust-up in the community, and the faithfulness to Amish traditions by that younger generation were severely challenged. Pentecostals did not emphasize black and white so much, but they had their own prohibitions on color. There was one church in Western Maryland whose constitution actually prohibited the wearing of red by women. The reason for that is that more than 100 years ago, women in the sex trade frequently wore red dresses. So in the spirit of avoiding the very appearance of evil, these folks legislated against anyone wearing red. Well, in the spirit of fairness, they actually came to include the same prohibition for men, which meant if they wore ties, they weren't red. Now, by the 1960s, things began to loosen up a little bit, and a pastor of that church successfully navigated the problem and was able to get them to drop the prohibition on red from the church constitution. Within a few months, the church parking lot was filled with red cars. The men were wearing red neckties, and the women were wearing red hats, red shoes, and red dresses. It sounds funny when you talk about it. But it needs to be said that Christianity doesn't have a corner on religion in black and white. See the same thing with Muslims. You see the same things in most religious traditions. You even see it among secular humanists. Now, they don't mandate that anybody wear black or white, but they certainly have black and white views on a whole litany of issues. Now, there's a fatal flaw with religion in black and white. Life is not lived in black and white. Life is lived in living color. It is lived with nuances. It is lived in a world where you don't always have a chapter and verse to dictate behavior. And so people have to take the truths of sacred scripture, and at this point I will just talk about the Christian world. They have to take the Bible and adapt it to the world in which they live, and they have to make decisions. Now, a Jewish rabbi who lived about 2,000 years ago named Yeshua, or Jesus as he is better known to us, was in frequent conflict with the people who did religion in black and white. First, because he hung out with the wrong crowd. He hung out with the sinners, he hung out with the prostitutes, and he went to enough parties that he was called a drunkard. Now, we know that that was a slander. We know he certainly was not a drunkard, but he was bending the law in ways that they were uncomfortable. In fact, quite frequently, Jesus would say, "You've heard it said, but I say." And he would either seem to contradict the Mosaic law itself, or he would contradict the rabbis who had a spiritual and judicial authority in that world. But one of the things that you see about Jesus is that he didn't live in black and white. He lived a full-orbed life. He accepted people the way he found them. He engaged in vigorous discussions where he challenged their assumptions as well as the popular ones. One of my favorites is a conversation he had with a woman of ill repute. And she makes a snide comment to him about not having a husband. He says, "Well, you've said it well. You have had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with now is not your husband." In the course of the conversation, she really wanted to talk race. In other words, she wanted to deflect. And she said, "You Jews say that worship has to take place in Jerusalem. And we Samaritans say it takes place right here. That's religion in black and white." And Jesus looked at her and said, "But a time is coming when people will worship God in spirit and in truth." He refused to play into the false narratives and the false dichotomies that are created by living a life in black and white. I often thought the most profound book that American author John Steinbeck ever wrote was called East of Eden, which was made into a pretty good movie. And in that book, you have a father who was a very strict black and white kind of person, a man of deep religious principles, a man of integrity, a man of honesty. There's nothing wrong with him, except he has no problem relating to his compliant child who does everything that he wants him to do. But his second child is the child that every one of us have had, the one who pushes the boundaries, the one who raises the questions, the one who sends us for ibuprofen. And whenever he was faced with an issue with that son, he quoted a principle or he quoted a verse of scripture. The father, rather symbolically, has a stroke and is incapacitated. The other son has gone off to fight in the First World War. The bad son, the son who didn't live in black and white, is the one who is there to take care of him. There was in the other son a basic goodness, maybe like a lot of us, with other things in there too. And the climactic moment of the movie and the book is the reconciliation of the Father and the Son. I want to suggest that religion in black and white is full of problems. Jesus told another story about a publican, that is, a tax collector. And those were pretty disreputable characters in that day because they didn't really get a salary, they got a cut. So they extorted money from the population like crazy. The other was a religious leader. And they both come into the temple. And the religious leader makes sure that he's in a very prominent place where everybody can hear him pray. And he says, "Oh, Lord, I thank you that I am not like other people. And when you listen to that kind of prayer, and we've all heard them, you don't know whether to thank God for that person or to thank that person for God. Then over in the corner, the tax collector has shown up. He is a penitent. He is on his knees. His head is bowed. And he said, Lord, I am not worthy. Have mercy on me. Religion in black and white runs in two directions. It either causes us to think we're a lot better than we really are, or a lot worse than we really are. Either of those will distance you from God. If we take pride in our accomplishments and in our righteousness, in our correctness, it's hard for God to get near anybody that's self-sufficient. But the person who feels completely unworthy because they can't measure up, that person is also distanced from God. I think it is interesting that in the Christian tradition, God becomes human. He doesn't become a book. He doesn't become a set of rules. He doesn't come in black and white. In fact, he's born to a single mom. His parentage is a subject of debate and rumor so long as he lives in his little town of Nazareth. He grows up in a family on the margins. His stepfather is a carpenter, so he didn't do badly, but he wasn't making out famously. The Jesus of the Gospels is a man with muscular forearms. That's what happens to a carpenter. He has calloused hands. He tells earthy, farm-based stories. He does eat with the sinners. He does hang out with the wrong crowd. He does challenge black and white. Ultimately, it causes that religious establishment to make up their minds that he needs to be eliminated. Except in trying to eliminate him, the Christian tradition tells us that God the Father, who sent him here, raised him from the dead and gave him the highest seat of honor in heaven. That's what happens when the faith we hold acknowledges our whole humanity, when it doesn't try to make people toe the mark, when it is not religion in black and white. This is Dr. Gary Kellner. Thank you for joining us today on Fair Game.